Hey everybody, it's Eric from EPAutos.com, your libertarian car guy. Caught some interesting news I thought I'd pass along, having to do with GM's eyes-off, hands-off self-driving tech that they are talking about being available in a number of their models. I think they're going to start with the Cadillac IQ, which is basically the electric version of the Cadillac Escalade, come 2028, so not that far away, about 2 years, actually less than that, because the model years tend to be introduced usually about halfway into a given calendar year. But anyway, the thing about it that I thought is interesting is that it's going to be different from the so-called, I'm putting it in air fingers brackets, self-driving tech that I've written about before and that you may have heard about before, which isn't really that, because while the vehicle can steer and brake, it still requires the driver, and I italicize that, to be ready to intervene at all times. In other words, the driver is expected to keep his eyes on the road. The driver is expected to have his hands in such a position as to be ready to grab the steering wheel, and presumably also his foot to apply the brake in case the so-called self-driving tech is about to run into something. Because it glitches, or the camera didn't see something of that nature, and that it's both paradoxical and it's oily in that you're either a driver or you're not, and this business of encouraging people to engage a system that wink wink requires them to keep their eyes on the road and be ready to intervene. Everybody understands that most people aren't going to do that. They're going to go to sleep, they're going to text, they're going to do anything but keep their eyes on the road and their hands on the wheel, because after all, it's got self-driving tech. Of course, that's a great recipe for accidents, and those accidents have happened, and it's inevitable that sort of a thing is going to happen, and it raises questions about who ultimately is liable. The manufacturers will say, well, we told them that they had to be ready to intervene at any time, but at the same time, I think you can make a very, very credible, strong argument that, look, you're encouraging people to not pay attention, to not look at the road, to not be ready to intervene. I think that's just, that's not even something that has to be belabored. So anyway, Cadillac is openly saying that this tech that they're going to have out in about 2 years will not require the driver to be ready to intervene, that the driver will formally, and I guess legally, be told that, yep, you engage this system, and if you want to take a nap, you can go right ahead and take a nap. You don't have to keep your eyes on the road. You can watch a movie, you can text, you can do whatever you want to when the tech is on, because the vehicle is fully capable of safely maneuvering itself and knowing not to run into the rear end of another car, a bridge abutment, run off the road, run over a pedestrian. Now, just for the sake of discussion, hypothetically, let's assume that's true. I don't think it is. I don't think any technology is infallible, just for the same reason I don't think any human being is fallible, and I think you're still going to have the issues of the tech sometimes glitching or a problem happening and the car running into the rear end of somebody or running somebody over. But let's set that aside for a moment. The thing that I really wanted to get at here, the thing that I think is interesting is, well, why even bother with buying a car at that point? I mean, GM is ostensibly in the business of selling cars to people, and if you're not even going to drive the thing, if it's basically just a taxi without the taxi driver, why even bother? Why would you sign up for the payments on this vehicle when you could just, tap an app, as they say, summon an Uber? Then you don't have to deal with any of it. If you're totally going to get rid of driving as a part of owning a car, at that point it is quite literally transportation as a service, and that's the term that some of the vehicle manufacturers have been using for quite some time now. So it's not like they're not letting us know, but I don't know where they're going to go with this. It's paradoxical, isn't it? Because if they're going to stop selling cars, then how do they make money? Well, I guess they're going to sell money or make money by selling you transportation as a service. You'll sign up to have, I guess, just unlimited access, or maybe ride by the app. I don't know what it is. It strikes me as something that might ultimately, in the end, undermine their own business model. Of course, there is also another aspect of this too, in that vehicles are getting so expensive. You may have caught my article, and you may have heard it elsewhere, about the average price paid for a new vehicle is now over $50,000. It's almost impossible to find any kind of a vehicle that isn't basically a little small crossover that's not really viable for a family for less than $30,000. That's becoming the entry price point. And if that trend continues, it's going to get to the point where, I don't know, half, maybe 2/3 of the population won't be able to afford a car anyway. So why bother with that? And then they'll just Uber. They'll tap the app and they'll summon the ride. Maybe that's the angle here. I don't know. Anyway, I just thought it was all pretty interesting. I'm going to have a longer article about that up at epautos.com. You may also be interested in the article that I just posted earlier today having to do with the quote-unquote pause VW has announced with regard to production of their ID Buzz, which is their electric reincarnation of the old microbus of the 60s and the 70s, and they've had to pause, that is, halt production of it, because sales are just bad. And sales are bad not necessarily because it's a bad vehicle, but because it's such an expensive vehicle. $60,000 to start is way beyond the means of any kind of mass market, so it's hard to see how you sustain a production on a mass scale of a vehicle that they can only sell a handful of. And then there's also other good news in terms of the pause, in that GM has finally decided to pull the plug, if you will, on their electric van that hasn't been going anywhere. They've sold less than 300 of these things so far, so that's gone. So this whole EV thing is kind of imploding, which I'm happy about, not because I hate EVs, but because I really hate the way that they have been pushed on people by trying to use regulations to eliminate the alternatives to them and leave nothing but EVs that are way expensive and for most people simply not very practical. Anyway, if you're interested in any of that, the articles are over at EP Autos. Thanks so much for listening to me, and if you like what I'm doing, please let other people know. Hope to see you also over at EP Autos, where you can comment without having to pay, because EP Autos is a free speech joint. We don't charge and we don't limit your reach either. So again, thanks, and we'll catch up with you soon.